2 years here in the master's program in geography. Just real quickly, I'd like to thank Jennifer, whom I've not met in person, but Mike and Angela for serving on Brad's committee. And so we will start with a presentation from Brad. There will be some time for questions from the audience following that. Then we'll ask everybody to leave, give the committee a chance to ask Brad some questions about the document and the research, and then we'll invite you, well actually then we'll kick you out, invite you back in after we've made our decision and see what happens. Cool. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Brad.
Thanks, Norm. So welcome everybody. Start out with a little tone set here with Mizzou's values of respect, responsibility, discovery, and excellence. I got a few acknowledgments of my own real quick. To the universe, to the earth and all their elements, to the elder life community, and to the ancestors, and to anybody who had to put up with me during my 2 years here. Thank you for the part you've played in this journey. I want to chat with you all about emancipating education through place. So where we're going to go is I want to talk about the importance of education, types of education that are important for the research, the study and the results that it found, at least some of them, and then open it up, like Soren said, to some discussion to hear your opinion and your thoughts on this collaborative effort. So why is education important? I want you all to maybe kind of think about that in your own brain. Why is education important, or is it important? I think if you think about what is the pressing issue facing the world that you care about personally, and then like how would you go about addressing that issue? You need education to do that. You need to learn certain skills and knowledge, wisdom to figure that out, to address it. So education, how we educate, is going to affect how we address those issues and affect what we do about them. So this exploratory case study is I was curious about what is experiential ed like here at Mizzou. Chancellor Cartwright back in 2016 stated that experiential education is already common across NU's colleges and schools and colleges, and could be expanded to all students. And coming from an outdoor experiential ed background, I was just curious, I wonder if what is meant by experiential ed when he says it, or when Mizzou says it, is the same as what I think of from my experiences. So that's where my natural curiosity went. So I want to establish what experiential ed is: significant learning, place-based education, and any links that might be going on between them. And so when I'm covering these, I'm both going to be defining them for us, and I'm also going to be starting to introduce some of the links and things that came from the study itself. And then I'll get into the study in more depth. So the how. How do we educate? Which of these is experiential education? You think it's the one on the right? Raise your hand. If you think it's the one on the left, raise your hand. So one way to conceptualize or think about experiential learning comes from David and Alice Kolb, and they call this the experiential learning cycle. So you have a concrete experience, you have some kind of reflection on that experience, you're given at some point some abstract conceptualization of of something that connects to that experience, and then you have active experimentation. It doesn't have to be in that order, but those are four areas you need to hit. So going back here, no matter where you're at, I would argue you're having a concrete experience. Different concrete experiences maybe, but you're having a concrete experience. Reflection. I've been in lectures where there's time given and all right, maybe just reflect on it, maybe come up with some questions. So you could reflect on both of those. Abstract conceptualization, I see Tony, man bun guy over there, the farm manager for CCUA. He's introducing some abstract conceptualization to the students. So would whoever is way up there at the podium. And then active experimentation, again, it seems less likely here, but I would say I've been in lectures where, again, time is made for like, well, stop and like discuss with a partner about that thing that we were just talking about. So potentially, both of these could be experiential education if we're going to use that cycle, and potentially both could not be. Well, then what is it then? I like to help to conceptualize this. Think of education as stair steps. And so where you start, what your number one is going to build upon that and lead to number two, lead to number three. So it's really important, what is step one? That is important to understand really what experiential education is about. It's about student impulses, okay? Now this is coming from back at the turn of the 20th century, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, people like John Dewey, Mary Parker Follett, they started in the scholar conceptualization or theorization of what experiential education would be. And they were pushing back against what they called traditional or mainstream education, because they argued that you needed to start with the student impulses and channel that. And as you start to channel that, it kind of naturally flows into morals and ethics that are associated with that. Then you're going to maybe introduce the disciplinary content, and eventually you'll get to some kind of usable knowledge for that pressing issue. And that, again, that was very different from what they saw as starting with the teacher expertise. And then from that teacher who knew you were going to gain conceptual understanding, maybe get some practice at it, and then that was going to give you your usable knowledge. So that last step, that usable knowledge, was that the same usable knowledge? And that's what experiential educators were arguing, that you don't. When you start with student impulses, you empower those students, and when they get to that final step, they're actually able to address that pressing issue in ways maybe that even the teacher didn't know. So it seemed like a better how to them. Something else to consider is that John Dewey warned, like, I don't want to make it seem that, like, well, we have it right and they have it wrong. Because he argued that any educator, no matter what ilk or what adjective you want to use in front of education, you have that same goal. You want students to have that outcome, to have that usable knowledge, to really go out there and do things. It's just they were arguing that if you changed how you were doing it, you would better achieve that. And so this idea of, we just want education plain and simple. Like, don't get obsessed with calling it experiential or place-based or group projects or any of the other, I know Jennifer would certainly know, all of the adjectives that can go in front of education if you're going to study education. It's like, that has a time and place, but really what is it that's just going to get students to where they need to go so they can address those? The what? So Professor L.D. Fink worked over at Oklahoma, and he developed a great model to conceptualize that shared, what is it that we want students to have as the outcome? And he called it significant learning. And so you start with discipline-specific knowledge, say physics, right? So you have your discipline-specific knowledge, but wow, we need to be able to apply that knowledge. So if you're going to apply that knowledge, you're also going to need to integrate it. But you need to be able to apply it before you can integrate it. To integrate it, you need to be able to have social skills, right? If you're going to integrate across different realms, can you partner with people and work together? Can you reflect internally on your own self so that you understand how you fit into the larger picture? And if you do that enough, you really develop a deep care for that discipline-specific knowledge. Oh, I understand what physics does. I understand how it fits into this larger picture. Man, I really care about this. And then that also gives you the ability to learn how to learn. If you have these human skills and this caring, like, oh, I understand how I made those connections. Maybe I can help the next generation, or I can help out there. So it's this significant learning. It's this deep, thick outcome. That's what all educators want. Whether you claim to be experiential or place-based or whatever, that's what everybody wants. I talked about place-based. Let's talk more about that. Because we're going back to what is the best how? How do we educate people to achieve the significant learning? Place-based education. Think about that cycle I introduced earlier. But now you're bringing in place. You're bringing in the focus of place, the context of it. And even back when Dewey and others were kind of forming experiential education, they talked about setting and landscape. They talked about its role and its importance. But place-based educators, and this is a more recent, not brand new, but a more recent adjective thrown in front of education, again, to address those pressing issues. They wanted to bring that into maybe intention and a focus of it's really, really important actually where this happens. And maybe that was why when I showed that earlier picture and the garden and everybody shot their hand up with experiential ed, right? Oh, there's something special about that place compared to that other place. Kind of a classic definition of it comes from David Sobel, and it's about going out into community, right? So more often than not, the classic field trip, that's your everyday. That field trip wouldn't even be in the lexicon because that's mostly you're going out into the community. So the role of the instructor is more to facilitate out in the community. And I don't know this maybe exactly what Zach is really interested in, but I know this person over there, I know this business owner, and let's partner with them. And then that, Zach's impulse, he's really into that type of business. I'm gonna make that connection as the educator. So I have that expertise to make those links. It's also to think about it as unrepeatable. Kristen Schulte, who is I forget her exact title, but she plans the educational programs for Missouri River Relief. She used that term I interviewed her in the interview with her of being unrepeatable. So place-based education is important because I can't take that experience and go reproduce it into a gymnasium or move it around to a different part of campus. No, even to move that experience those students are having right there in that picture to a different stretch of the Missouri River, it's not going to work. It's going to be different. Not that it won't be good if you do that, but I intentionally chose that place because of what the students needed based on their impulses. That's how much intention is going into this. Another instructor that I interviewed really linked place-based education and experiential education really well. She said, well, if you're rooting into place, it inherently requires that you adopt experiential methods. So if you're worried about, I'm going to try and do experiential ed over here, but it doesn't seem like it's working right. Well, if you root it in place, it's going to be really difficult not to do experiential methods. And again, when you think experiential methods, think student focus. That's the takeaway there. So you're always in place and you're always experiencing something. Right now, we're in a place we're experiencing something, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're learning. And that's another flaw that a lot of people make. Well, we're gonna go out on this sweet hike, or we're gonna go out into the community, and we're gonna, like, Zach, let's go talk to a business person. If you don't have a plan, if you don't have some intention behind why you're doing that, learning isn't going to be optimized. And so that's an important thing to think about is not only is it student focused and you're bringing place in, but here, this is where the instructor, that expertise knowledge, that was the starting block of mainstream ed, that's where you come in and you help connect these different experiences for students of here's what I can bring to this experience for you, here's how they're connected to that impulse, here's why it's meaningful for you. That, I would argue, is education plain and simple. And education plain and simple seems like what is being said is it's deep, it's thick. So you need to start up here and make time for this. You have to it's gonna take more time, but you take the time to dig through all this layer of place, all 6 layers of significant learning, all 4 cycles of experiential learning. Don't shy away from morals and ethics. Let's talk about that. Why is it okay to do what we're doing? And again, nobody but the student's focus. You don't have to do that. And I would argue that especially with time constraints, oftentimes you come in here, I don't have time to go on that. Maybe I'll come inside. Yep, that's gonna make it more time efficient. And I don't have time for all those significant learnings, but we have time to apply. Okay, we can get to application. Experience, let's hit 2 of those, and be well behaved. Yeah, that's good enough. And obviously there's anything in between that, right? Those are 2 extremes, but man, there's all kinds of different ways to go about that. But how deep is the education? Shift gears here to the methodology for the exploratory case study. They use grounded theory. And grounded theory doesn't start with a theory that's established and then kind of go in and use that to do it. It actually works in reverse. So you immerse yourself in the phenomena you're interested in. In my case, experiential ed at Mizzou. Pretty handy because I was already immersed in it, right? But so from that immersion, I gather and generate and analyze data, and the theory is going to emerge from that. Here's what's happening at Mizzou. So as I started to, again, think about experiential ed at Mizzou, establish these links between PBE, SL, and experiential learning, then it was like, well, what is it like? And so, both in my roles as instructor and student at Mizzou, that generated data. Maybe that's a good place to pause for a bit. So I am the researcher, but I am also a participant. And that may seem not doable for a lot of people, but you gotta think of the philosophical ideology, like what I'm assuming to be true about the world, like what that's based in. And I assume that I can embrace my subjectivity and minimize it and still get at, like, so when I'm interviewing people or when I'm having these experiences as an instructor and as a student, I'm taking into account the bush hippie Brad, like I have my lens that I'm looking through. And instead of trying to push that away and I need to be objective, it's more of like, come here, I need you close, just so I can keep my eye on you, because you're not bad, but I need to keep an eye on you, because I do realize that I can be swayed and maybe miss some truth, miss some perceptions. So I'm a participant and I'm the researcher, and then in addition to those, I interviewed 16 instructors, some of them at Mizzou, some of them were outside Mizzou, and that was intentional because I wanted some outside Mizzou community perspective, but I wanted in the Columbia community perspective. Because thinking about place-based education, right, if we're gonna be doing that at Mizzou, you're gonna be going out there. So I was curious what folks thought, what other instructors thought. The idea of concurrent data generation and analysis. That's not something that's unique to grounded theory, but grounded theory, I would say, leans heavily on it, maybe more than other methods. And so what that means is, as I'm having an experience as a TA instructor, I'm also interviewing people. As I'm going out on hikes, exploration of place, I'm also interviewing other people. This is all happening at once, and so they're informing each other. So once I have an experience, it informs the next one. So I'm gathering data, and I'm analyzing it, and that just keeps influencing me until this theory emerges from it. And the literature has a unique relationship. I engaged in it a little bit here at the front to kind of better understand what place-based and some of these terms were. And then I needed to stop really focusing on that. I needed to immerse myself in it. And then at the end, after the initial theory had really shown forth, that's when I re-engaged the literature. Why that's important is because if I engage the literature in between, it would be easy to even subconsciously superimpose. Oh, yeah, what that person said, that's totally what's happening right now. No, like I wanted to make sure I was immersed in what's happening at Mizzou. And then when it got to a point of, this definitely happened at Mizzou, this is what they were saying. How do I expound on that? That's when literature came back in. Another good graphic for generation, record, analyze. I want to zoom in on the interviews themselves as a microcosm of what this might look like, right? So these bled into each other. So not only was I interviewing people, but I was also transcribing, right? So I completed the interview with Angela, and I started transcribing her interview, but I was also interviewing Soren and other people. So this wasn't, again, just whoop, whoop, whoop. This was bleeding into each other, right? As the transcriptions were wrapping up, I started, oh man, there's some definite themes that people are talking about here. And that's what the codes were. Oh, this is what people are starting to say. So I started kind of recording some codes as that went on. And if you were to do this to scale, coding would be like take up a much bigger portion of it, because there's 3 stages within coding. It's this constant process of trying to reorganize, because you stop analyzing at some point, breaking apart the data, what people are saying, and analyzing it, and you start to synthesize it back together. And that synthesis process is what eventually is the theory. And once that theory's emerged, you use that literature to fully abstract it out. So maybe it can be taken out of the Mizzou context and used. How you do that is memoing. Because again, I gotta bring in my subjective self and be like, is that what Tony said in the interview, Brad? Or is that what you wanted Tony to say? Or did you just mishear Tony? And so you go back. I would even more than leaning on the transcripts, for me, maybe I'm more auditory, I don't know. I went back and I listened to the interviews again. I was like, okay, yeah, that's why they call it red flags, when you start to be like, I don't know if that's actually what the interviewee was saying. You go back to it and you're like, yeah, that's not what they were saying, that's what you misheard, that's what you wanted them to say. So that memoing process is huge. And if you go back to that, memos are important because not only can they be used for analyzing, they can generate data themselves and they can record. So it's this constant kind of conversation you're having. with the data. The emergence of the theory. So I came up with 124 codes, swimming in codes. I'll give you some examples here. So some of them were always learning, unexpected learning, slow time, options, mindfulness, and challenge. And so underneath all of those, I would have, I would include blurbs that were direct quotes, or I would have paraphrases for myself. And so that kind of helped me kind of start to wrap my head around it. There's all 124. And whoo, man.
Wait.
You really want to try and look at all that? Okay. And so this was like the part where it really started to transition from analysis to synthesis. It's like, all right, I finished the interviews. Here's 124 codes. What? Okay. What are they trying to say? What out of all this are they saying? Cool. So what's the relationship? And again, a lot of memoing, a lot of going back to the interviews, and the proto-theory that came out of that was this idea of, I think they're saying something about holistic education, and the big things that really pop out and grab me are community, the pace of time, always learning, being critical, and relationship. And I knew that this was a proto-theory when it first emerged, both because the textbook I leaned heavily on, A Practical Guide to Grounded Theory, said that that's kind of what will happen. But it was kind of like a big moment of like, okay, there's this theory that's starting to be born. When I went back to the interviews, memoed more, I was like, no, that's actually not exactly what's happening here. They're talking about two separate kinds of communities. And you can ignore these labels for now, because I didn't exactly know what to label them at first when I made this change, but it was very binary at first. And so that time-pace code got broken into hurried and unhurried. Like there seems to be this divide between this like unhurried pace of like wild folk and this like hurried pace that seems to be happening at Mizzou. And I was like, oh, cool, like all these codes are gonna kind of have opposites. And then so as I started going through, it was like, it came to always learning, and then it was like, oh, that ain't it, because yeah, like that community, that group would, always learning, that's a good thing. It's like, all right, so one, it's not binary, but what else is going on here? And so that's when I went back to the literature. This is when I felt like, okay, this theory has really started to come out solidly. I'm not gonna be overly influenced if I go back to literature. And so place. Place has maybe two ways you can think about it. One is this Western conceptualization, okay? So it's kind of this addition, this location, that's just kind of like objective, locale, material settings, trees, buildings, things, and then this human element, this emotion, and then you add those together and you get place. That's different than indigenous conceptions. And the one thing I'll say, I don't have enough time to maybe go in depth on this, and this is a very thick, finicky term to try and explain to you all. But indigenous, don't think of indigenous as relegated to one race or ethnicity. And if you're a human being, you can go back into your own indigeneity. You might have to go back further in your own ancestral heritage to get there. But it's the spiritual connection to place. It goes much deeper. The location itself is holy and sacred. The locale and the human lens is also holy and sacred. It's really hard. I leaned on Vine Deloria and Robin Wall Kimmerer for this, and it's hard. It doesn't translate directly between these two. There's a lot that goes on. It's just hard. So that was where it gave birth to the final theory here of there's really this time focused, and then there's this place focused. And then each one of those, the other codes could kind of be molded and shaped by those conceptions. And there's this idea of residents and inhabitants. Are you inhabiting a place, or are you just residing there? This is very like kind of colonial, and this is very like decolonial. And that's what it seems like what the Mizzou community is like after this research. Is there's a lot more residents than inhabitants, and again, this is entangled inside everybody. I'm not just an inhabitant, I'm both inhabitant and resident. And that's so is everyone in this room, everyone. And so when you zoom out though, thinking geographically, when you zoom out to a different scale, the whole Mizzou community, it's like, well, the ratio inside Brad, I guess he's now a resident. So this is what it seems like the ratio would be in our community. And I don't know if that's necessarily what we need or want. I would argue that's not what we need or want. want. We need to be more place-focused. So, if you want to do that, slow down. Easier said than done, I realize that. I hope you have some good ideas in the discussion. Slow down. What are the student impulses? What do they want? What do they need to get out of it? They know. You don't know as the instructor, they know. Find out. Prioritize their relationship with place. Doing that, yeah, you'll be able to get to that pressing issue. They will better be able to be set up to make the world a better place. Lots of sources coming at you. Memorize them. I'll open up for y'all.
Great. So we have some time for questions.